Welcome to the Adamas podcast with your host, Yvonne, public speaking consultant.
And Steph, visibility coach, as we answer all of your public speaking questions every single month. This is us, Juntas Beyond the Stage.
All right, let's get right into it. We actually have some questions this
We
month
do. This
that were
was
submitted by folks.
by real human people. It was honestly so exciting. Even before we started putting together this episode and, well, we're about to dive in and share some advice, Yvonne was like, we just got another question. And I'm like, no way.
Yeah, so thank you all for submitting these questions. I mean, not that last time there weren't real people submitting questions, but there was maybe one or two that came in. And this time we are like, we actually get to choose which questions to answer during this episode. We have some leftover for the following month. So thank you all for engaging, supporting, and being a part of this. This is what dreams are made of right here. Questions being submitted. So
Like,
thank
that's
you.
like a song. What movie is that from?
Yep. This is a dreams are made of. Lizzie McGuire. I'll never forget that. Such a pivotal moment in my life. I always wanted the little they had the little action figure of Lizzie McGuire. Not the action figure, sorry, the animation that she would talk to in the movie.
Yeah.
I always wanted my version of that.
That's hilarious because when we were talking about branding for this show, you actually were talking about having little illustrations of us. And I was trying to visualize what that would look like. It's Lizzie McGuire, literally.
Yep. One day. All right. Shall we get into some of these questions?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if we can tackle them, depending on how long it takes us, we have maybe 2-3 questions that I think would be really good to focus on today.
Let's do it. Do you want to start us off?
Sure. Yeah, I can go ahead. Let's see. So the first question was submitted by Daenerys, and they were asking, do you have any tips to control your voice when you are speaking so that you don't start talking too fast?
That's a good one.
This is something I actually struggle with so much myself. I don't know if it's a mix of the fact that I'm Latina, specifically from Argentina. I feel like we speak a little bit faster than a lot of other folks. Or maybe it's a personality thing, right? It's just sometimes I can get very high energy, especially if I'm excited. And then especially even so if I'm nervous. I think one of the tips that really helps me is breathing, slowing down while I'm actively going through the thing. And I think specifically before I start talking is making that mental intention that I am going to take my time. I am going to pause. I'm going to allow myself to breathe, to maybe take a sip of my water, to busy myself in other ways other than just talking. Because what naturally comes up for me a lot of the times, especially if I'm nervous, is I'll feel this pressure to fill the silence so that it's not awkward, so that I'm constantly keeping things in motion, so that people are engaged, so that I am saying the right things. But in wanting to do so, I end up putting so much more pressure that when I'm not sure what I'm going to say next, especially because sometimes my brain thinks a little bit faster than I speak or the other way around. So I get a little very jumbled up and overwhelmed with that is I'll start filling up my sentences or my story with filler words. So whether it's up, like, right, and they start coming out more and more and more and more. But when I realize that I don't constantly have to be talking in order to be engaging or sound smart, I allow myself to just slow down and maybe pause and breathe and all the things and even just hold silence sometimes. Even if you're talking with somebody else, it's okay to have what you would traditionally discuss as an awkward silence and just allow that moment for everything to sink in, for it to really register what you're saying, what somebody else is saying. And I find that once you step into that and you allow yourself you give yourself the permission to slow down and to breathe, it becomes more natural. And then it's almost like you regulate your nervous system and it's like, okay. And it's easier to maintain. And then I don't slip so much into the fast talk, which I'm not going to lie, it still happens. Sometimes I'll reach 5 minutes into a speech or a presentation and I'll get really, really passionate, really, really overly confident than maybe I was 5 seconds ago. And it will just go into a blur of fast speech. But until then, and even after the fact, it's easier to then go back into the calmer state, the more regulated state where it's like, okay, we're just going to take our time. We're going to breathe. I'm going to take a sip of water and this is going to be amazing. And I'm not going to allow myself to get even more nervous because of how quickly I'm talking.
Yeah. You made some really great points. The first one was that I think it does have something to do with maybe Argentinians talk really fast because when I was in high school or middle school, actually, my Spanish teacher was from Argentina and I speak Spanish, right? That was my first language. And I used to be like, wait, what? I was like, wait. I'm not used to this kind of Spanish. So I think it has a little to do with that. Uh, I love what you said. I love the tips that you gave. And what I'll tell to listeners is that applying what you just mentioned actually requires you to know yourself because maybe for you it won't work to have the water, right? So it requires you to have this deep engagement with self-awareness and being like, when do I speed talk? When have I noticed that I speak speed talk, right? So that these methods that you talked about aren't implemented in one when you know you're about to get hella passionate about what you're talking about. Or someone like me, I start talking really quickly right at the beginning. So the techniques that I decide to use always have to be in the beginning. The most preparation that I do for my own sake is at the very beginning of my speaking engagement because I know that I'm going to fall into place, right? Like I'm going to fall into my most natural tone of voice and who I am because I'm going to start to get comfortable and I'm going to be like, well, I'm already here. Like I can't leave now. I already just started my sentence. And so for that reason, the way that I think for you, Steph, what you mentioned are the techniques to use when you're live doing the thing. But it's really, really important to also do the prep work, right? Like, hey, I know that I'm going to want to get off the stage. I'm probably going to speed up throughout the entire thing. Okay, great. Let's work together to find techniques that work for every single portion, every single part of your speech, right? Because if you tie it back to your message, it's like you want this thing to really hit home. You don't want to speed through that. So let's say you give yourself some leniency and you're like, okay, well, I sped through the rest of the thing, but I practiced and rehearsed this one thing that I know is going to be the most impactful. Let me intentionally be slower here. And then I think the other thing is this is something that I used to do when I was in theater, and it was a bunch of like the how now brown cow, right? That's more for enunciation and for really moving your actual mouth. Because I think sometimes what happens, at least for me, right before going on stage is I'm an introvert, right? Which means I need alone time, I need me time, I don't want to be talking to people. But it also is my mouth literally physically is closed that entire time. It's not doing anything. So when it's time to go up and speak, I'm like, your mouth out of it right before going on stage or where you are. And then I am going to recommend that y'all follow someone who does vocal activation things. Her name is Daisy, and she's goes by the Liberated Latina on Instagram. Sign up for the newsletter. She is a vocal activation coach, certified y toda la cosa, and she actually gives you real cool techniques to activate your voice so that when you go on that stage, it's the most authentic expression of who you are. If you're a fast talker in general, which naturally we all are, or a slow talker, with naturally we all can be too, then that requires even more techniques, right? But if you're speaking too quickly because you're nervous, that's one technique. If you're speaking too quickly because that's just how you speak normally, then okay, that requires a different type of technique, right? So that's kind of there's many different answers in that way, but the Liberated Latina does a really great job at talking about voice activation and how to really control your voice, what's actually coming out of your mouth when you are on stage. So that would be that's my tip right there.
I love that we get to amplify like other entrepreneurs, other business owners, other speakers through this platform. That's just so much freaking fun.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, she's amazing. Sends a newsletter out and everything and is very, very knowledgeable.
Would you like to introduce the next question?
Yeah, let's do it. How many topics is too many? This is a really good question. I have a lot I could say, but don't want to overwhelm people with too many choices. I feel this, right? Steph, do you want to go first?
What immediately comes to mind for me, funnily enough, has nothing to do with public speaking, and it's got to do with like being a business owner and having a variety of different offers. And I remember when I first started my business, I was trying to price out one specific offer that had different tiers. And one of the like thoughts that was living rent free in my brain at the time, it was advice that I had received through a course that I took at the very beginning of my entrepreneurship journey. And the piece of advice was something along the lines of limiting the package offers or the options that
Hmm.
people have so that they don't sit there in complete overwhelm and then don't end up making an investment decision based on that because they're like, oh, which one's better? I'm not sure. Do I want those frills or that or this or that? What's good for me? I'm not have no idea. So literally that was the first thought that came to mind. So usually what I like to do or like to recommend is for folks to focus on, let's say, 2 to 3 different talks, knowing that that is not the limit. It's not set in stone. It's more about presenting intentionally what you want to be known for. So if you are a public speaker and there's one specific area of expertise, then let's focus on that, whether that means having 1, 2, or 3 topics, depending on what those talks are. But if, for example, on the other hand, you're a business owner and that's how you're leveraging public speaking, then what do you have going on in your business? And what are your offers? And start to figure out if you are, for example, going into an area or let's call it a season, season of your business where you really want to focus on your one group program. Then figure out what the focus is there, what's the theme, what's the topic, and make that one of your speaking topics so that you can build a lot of awareness and authority, thought leadership around that topic. That as people get to learn more about you, you become known as that go-to, let's say, expert for that specific area of expertise. So whether it's expertise based, your speaker topics, or if you want to bring a little bit of balance and diversity throughout your speaker portfolio, then you can bring in something that's more personal brand based. You can bring something in that's values based. I love doing that. One of my talks has all about to do, it's got to do with redefining success. I'm not a success coach or a lifestyle coach, but it's still something that I value so deeply that to be able to share those stories and those perspectives and ideas that I have with more people is something that's such a core part of my brand that it makes the cut for my 2 to 3 expert speaker topics. So it's usually a guide that I like to give people because it really allows you to get creative with what you want to speak on to build a very holistic brand as a speaker and as a business owner. And then from there, like I mentioned, you're not capped. So if you're ever pitching yourself to somebody and you know that there's a different take, a different angle, or a different topic that would be a really good fit for their community, their event, you get to do that. But at least when people are learning about you, they're landing on your website, they're seeing you as a speaker, they know exactly what your go-to key topics are. You get to build that brand around that, and you become the speaker that they want to invite into their podcast and their event.
Yeah. And I like this because it's a lot like storytelling. We all, when you think about a keynote, right, you're talking about lessons learned. I always like to start, what lessons have you learned in your life or what transformations have happened for you? And then that didn't happen overnight. There was a series of things that happened in your life that taught you that lesson, that created that transformation for you. But when you go up to talk to me for 15 minutes, you're not going to start from the beginning and talk to me about every single thing that's happened in your life to reach that transformation or to achieve that lesson learned, right? Public speaking is about making decisions. Public speaking and how and what we share is about making these key decisions about the information that we share. And that has nothing to do with one thing being more important than the other. It just has to do with what can my audience actually retain? What message can be the most impactful, and impact only happens if my audience can actually retain the information that I'm sharing. And that's how I would start to think about your topics. And Steph, I like that you bucketed them to say, do I want to be known for an expertise? Do I want to be known for a deep value? Do I want to be known for the resilience in my story? And if you can bucket those three things in that way, then you can create signature topics from that, right? But because we are all intersectional, we live in many different capacities, we do many different things. The beautiful thing about it is that public speaking and your signature topics also allow you to create something very specific for your audience and for whatever audience that is. It's almost like when you're making it easy for people to identify what you do so that then when they reach out to you, and this is often my favorite part about it, is I, as a creative, I want to be doing something different. I don't, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I don't like doing the same speech over and over and over again. It gets really repetitive for me as a speaker and creative. And so there are always things that I tweak to it, whether it be, let me replace this story and just kind of talk about this story, or let me change the format of this so there's a little bit more engagement with the audience, right? And so you having these signature topics and someone reaching out to you and saying, you're known for this, I want you to talk a little bit about this, allows you to say, okay, cool, and I can add this layer to it, right? So it's not necessarily something that you externally share with people, but the various angles that you could potentially take is something that now you have with folks once you have this more one-on-one conversation. Because so often people don't know that you could offer them this really amazing thing. Like, they don't even know what they're looking for oftentimes. And you, as a professional speaker, you can get really creative with it and say, have you thought about this? Based on your audience, I can approach it from this lens. And they're like, that's even better than I initially thought, right? So having that core messaging or those core signature topics or what you're known for is important, because that brings people to you and brings these speaking opportunities to you. And then in return, you get to be really creative with how you deliver them.
Like it 100%. And it's all about the angles and switching in different bits and stories and even tips, whatever it might be. I literally just saw something on stories. I think you shared it within the last 24 hours. And at least from an outsider perspective, it looked like it had been a customization on a talk that you did for that specific community. And it
Mm-hmm.
was the casita de jefas.
Like, speak like a jefa.
Yeah. You
Yeah.
like took you embodied or like brought in that part of their brand into your talk. And I was like, oh, that's so like clever and catchy. And it feels so custom to their experience for that specific talk. And I loved it. I mean, I didn't know for a fact, but I assumed it had probably been something you had talked on many times before, but this time it was special. It was different just for them.
And that's, I mean, thank you. I appreciate that. I also think that that's really important for us to do as workshop hosts, right? Especially as facilitators of learning. What that means, whenever you're hosting a workshop, it's kind of different than a keynote, right? A keynote, you get to know your audience, but not really, because you don't necessarily need to engage them in a specific activity. With workshops, I like to make, whenever someone hires me to do a workshop, I get so specific with the questions that I ask about the audience. If there's an opportunity for me to immerse myself in with the audience and like go and hang out with them for a little bit, or maybe they're having another event and I can attend it before my talk, I like to do that because it's important to me to not come to the workshop with just general information or general tips around public speaking, right? When I can make it really specific, I make it specific to what people need in that moment. It's not that much more work, because the foundation of it lives everywhere else in all of the other slides. It's like master slide deck that I have. And I just pull the tools that I think are going to be important for this particular workshop and change and tweak the activities based on who's actually in the room and what their level of experience with speaking is. So yeah, you can get so creative with it. That's probably my favorite part, is like, did you think about this? I could do this, right? Because that continues to make speaking really fun and engaging, even for me, right? I think at the end of the day, when you do speaking as your job, it is also a job, right? So like, you want to continue to make it fun for yourself. So like you said, Steph, don't limit yourself on the topics. Just get creative with how you externally present them, so that you can internally share them and get creative with folks. Once you've got it in the bag, get creative with it.
I feel like it's just this ongoing process where you're continuously refining how you deliver a talk, how you prepare for a talk, how you research it and tweak it and customize it. I feel like not only does it make it more fun, but then it can lend to so many other opportunities coming around. Like, I remember there was this one thing that I had done in a talk once that it just resonated so deeply with one of the attendees that then it was leading to more public speaking opportunities. And it's those customizations. that I had never done before and you're now implementing. It could be, it's like that, what did we say last time? That double-edged, double whammy,
I don't
double-edged
know. I messed
sword.
that one up. Remember, I messed that thing up. Really, Steph? You're gonna bring it up again?
It's gonna be a thing for like the entire year. It was just doubly awesome. Let's just go with that, even if
Is
it's
that
not a
kill two birds
thing.
with one stone? Is that the
Yes,
vibe we're going for?
yes.
Okay. Yeah,
You're
yeah, yeah.
killing two birds with one stone.
Yeah.
It is fun on your end. It brings out a better experience. It's three birds. It brings out more opportunities for you. It's just amazing how it turns to spiral and just flow into more and more and more abundance throughout your career, just because you're choosing to be more intentional and to have more fun and to be more aware of what it is that you're bringing into every room that you're stepping into.
Yeah. And all this is the last thing that I'll say on this, because I know I'm probably rambling at this point. A different, because I understand what it's like to feel like I have all of these things that I could talk about. And on any given day, I'm inspired to talk about this. And I also want to talk about this because this is connected to this. Everything is connected, right? I don't believe that one thing exists on its own. I could connect this to this other thing, right? And that means you're a great storyteller and a great connector of things. And no matter what's thrown at you, you can create something that resonates with people, right? So that's a really good thing. But it can be confusing for others to see it, right? And I'm guilty of this too. But what I think could be a really cool way of still sharing those other things that you're passionate about or those other values that you have is making your main thing that you talk about, that you share a lot more often and more frequently, is those signature topics. But then also every once in a while, whether it be on social media or somewhere else, right? Like talk about that other thing. Just mention it. Share one or two things about it, because that can attract someone and be like, oh, shoot, right? Like, for example, who knows? I mean, I mostly share my running stuff because it's like kind of like a journal to me on my stories, right? I have a few videos, I have a whole podcast where I'm like, oh, this is how running and public speaking go hand in hand, right? And running is also one of my passions. It's not a signature topic that I have, but if someone out there is watching that and they're like, "Ooh, I want to learn more about your running journey." Okay, cool. I could develop something around that, right? And it's not that is not what I lead with. It's not by any means something that I have on my website or anything, but it's through making connections with people beyond just your signature topic, because at the end of the day you are also a person and a human. And so finding creative ways to share the human side of you, the other experiences and the stories that you have to share, that you don't have to limit yourself as far as not sharing those things. I think that's what makes me feel connected to someone, is like, yes, you're a business. Yes, you are a speaker and you talk about these things and we're trying to get you booked and busy. And also, I want to know about you. If I don't get the opportunity to see you on stage or be in the audience of one of your speaking engagements, I want to know who you are. Like, I want to really actually connect with the person as well, not just the topics that you talk about. And so I think one of the ways to do that is to share those things. Record yourself talking about them or do a little behind the scenes kind of thing, right? Find ways to bring that into a lot of what you share, but not have it be the spotlight.
I'm going to say something without adding more to this thread of conversation, because I feel like we're going to be able to do this forever. Which actually, what I'm adding is exactly this. It's hard doing a co hosted show when you want to keep it short. I feel like literally everything you say, there's like another idea, another story, another something that I'm like, yes, that you just made me think of this. Let me share it. And I feel like I just want to feed off of you in this conversation for like the next like 2 hours.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to want to listen to us for an entire day. It's going to be like a live, like all day long series.
Hey, you never know. YouTube does live streams. We could do a whole live stream one day.
Oh my God, imagine. I didn't know
And
those
trust me,
things.
I could talk.
Oh, forever.
I may need a little break in between and be like, okay, I'm kind of over this right now. Give me 15 minutes. I'll be back.
You'll recharge your energy. I'll go cuddle with my toddler. We'll
Yes.
both get our whatever our fix and we'll come back.
Yeah. That being said, I'm going to go into our last question that we received and ask you, what are some techniques or actions you do daily to become a better public speaker? I think this is a really great way to end our podcast episode for today, so that maybe you can go and engage in these things on your own.
So, this is my toddler. I'm going to run with that. something I do daily, and I don't do it on purpose to become a better public speaker. I just find that it's something that I've been doing for now a year and a couple months. And it really is helping me kind of like develop this skill. And it has
Hmm.
to do with storytelling because I think for context, one of my weaknesses, if you will, is that I can get in my head and I find that I shouldn't go too deep into a story because then it's going to be this long tangent and I'm going to be rambling on and nobody's going to find this interesting and there's going to be no point and people are going to be telling me to get to the point. So I go through that spiral, that thought process. So I tend to keep my stories very short, very like
Mm.
highlight level, and I won't actually give them the color and depth that sometimes is needed. And what I've been doing with my toddler, who is literally staring at me, he just crawled up to the door right now, is for his sake, I've been talking a lot, even though he can't communicate yet. And specifically, I've been talking a lot to him in Spanish because I want him to
Mm.
be able to have the language since we live in a country that's mostly English speaking. And I speak to him. I practice my Spanish. I let him hear different words. I try to describe things in new and creative ways, not just focusing on only the colors and only the shapes and only the typical, like, let's say, dinosaur noises. So I think it's really allowing me to get more comfortable and just give myself that permission that it's okay to talk and to ramble and to describe things and to tell that story. If it's going to serve that speech, if it's going to serve a purpose, it's going to allow me to connect with people in some way when I'm sharing my message. So I
Hmm.
think that's something that the more I do it, the more intentional I'm slowly starting to become with it, where it's like, right, this is good for my son, but it's also good for me and my speaking career. That's like a double again.
Yeah, I love that. I really love that because it's like we learn to dilute, right? Like, let's add some color back into it. Let's make it beautiful. Language is so beautiful. Get creative with the way that you express it, with the way that it sounds when it comes out of your mouth. Like, I love that example because I think I'm just going to shut up because I'm nerding out and that's going to take me into a completely different tangent. But yes, like practicing saying this thing out loud, and you have really no reservations around how you're doing it because what you're doing is doing it for your son, right? Which is something that's so beautiful. And bringing that into, I think, especially working in the corporate world and thinking like a comms person, right? I have to be real straightforward and just like say what I need to say and don't say too much, don't say too little, just the right amount. Storytelling is about going all over the place, right? Yes, as a speaker, you have to be all over the place in order to come back to self and come back to what am I actually wanting to communicate. But the color there is so important. And in connection to that, my thing would be my framework around mastering public speaking is reflect, connect, share. And in that reflection piece, that's the part that's really important to me. Whether it be a journal session, which I'm not really good at maintaining that habit, but something that I am really good at is going on my runs, right? Like going on my solo time. I think reading something out loud and thinking about it. Like I literally will read just one page of a book at a time and spend a whole hour reflecting on that very thing, on the things that it made me feel, on even the way that the writer was writing, right? I had this thing where I was reading this book and it was Mexican culture, goth culture, all kind of like a horror all mixed in, and it was a genre that usually isn't tapped into uh, from a Mexican lens, right? Though we have things like La Llorona and stuff like that, and that particular book, I reflected a lot on it because they would use words like rebozo. They would use words in Spanish and provide no context for it. There was no translation for it in the book, and that made me think, wow, that means that gives me permission to go on stage and talk in Spanish and say the thing in Spanish and have people figure that out. Have people wonder what it is in the same ways that I've gone to some conferences. I'm like, what was that word? Let me Google it real quick. Let me figure it out, right? Let me figure it out based on context. So I think something that I try to do daily is literally see the connections in everything that I do, which is why sometimes I ramble a lot and I'm so overwhelmed because I have so many thoughts and ideas, right? So, one, it's reading. Then it's engaging in an activity that I actually really do enjoy because that brings me to self. It brings me, like for me, it's running. As I'm running, I have no choice but to be with myself. There is no other person next to me. There is no other thing happening, no other thing that I can tune into besides my own thoughts, right? So I like listening to a podcast while I'm running my long distance. And then that brings the ideas because it makes you reflect on the things and your lived experiences. And those are the very things that make your signature topics unique. Like anybody could talk about being an introvert, but no one can talk about being an introvert in the ways that I experienced it, in the ways that I will do it because of that deep reflection that we engage in. And then the last thing that I do to become a better public speaker, I guess, this is actually more because I'm a consultant as well, and I always say this to people in our one-on-ones, but I'm like, "Thank you. Thank you for giving me the space to nerd out about what around what I really love doing." But it is I love going to events that have nothing to do with what I do on my own. Like, I love going to events that are gonna have speakers there that have absolutely nothing to do with any kind of I'll go to, like, a science fair event just to hear people speak. I went to a poetry event the other day at a library because I wanna hear people speak. That makes me a better public speaking consultant, I would say. Maybe not a better speaker, but as a consultant, I can see the different ways that people communicate, what things I notice, right? One of the things, and I'll just say this as a thing that I noticed about there was a poet. They went up and spoke. They were using a lot of filler words and were just visibly nervous. And then they got to reading one of their poems and their voice got so incredibly powerful. And my immediate thought was, wow, I just need 1 or 2 sessions with you. I want to talk about how you can bring that power that I'm hearing in the way that you read your poetry into your speaking because it is so powerful. So anyways, that's what I do. I go to things that have nothing to do with what I do and find the connections. And that's all we have for you all today.
Yes, until you submit your next question. So then we have more content, more advice to share with you on one of the upcoming episodes. And if you want to be featured, we would love to amplify you as a speaker, as a brand, as a business owner as well. Whenever folks, it doesn't have to be, it can be anonymous, but whenever folks want to be featured, they can always go ahead and share a little bit about themselves as a speaker, their speaker topics, how to connect with you so that we can help you not only learn how to either become a better public speaker, build your confidence as a public speaker, just learn a little bit more about what it looks like behind the scenes, but you can also hopefully book some public speaking engagements thanks to the content on the show.
Thank you all for tuning in. We'll see y'all next month. Bye.